I will tell you a little bit about myself and who we are and what we do. But what I would like to start with is, you probably read on the papers and you know lots about fraud and corruption. Some of you probably also read some silly books on compliance. But what we're going to try to do here is we are going to try to look at the dark side, look at the practical of what happens when fraud and corruption take place. And because my feeling is that, especially when we get into the corporate world, we tend to focus too much on the good side of how do we have the right procedures in place, do we have the right rules, do we have the right guidelines, and tend to forget the dark side, which is mainly all the things that can happen when things go wrong. So this is roughly what we are planning to cover today. We're going to spend a little bit demystifying fraud and corruption, what it is, getting away from definitions, and I think it's going to go faster here than it normally is in countries like Scandinavian countries when I work quite a lot. Is because what I normally do is some kind of warming up to make people understand that we are all fraudsters and we can all be part of the same game if we just decide that we have the right motivation and opportunity. So that kind of exercise takes quite a lot of time in Norway because they don't want to accept the fact that they could be fraudsters. So, but I believe that in Serbia it go faster. Like when I do it in Italy, it goes 2 seconds and people, yes, we are all fraudsters. So that's going to be very fast. Then we're going to talk about the risk of fraud and corruption, basically how to spot our own risks and how to understand which are the risks that are most likely to be happening in our company. We're going to do some interactive games or spotting red flags because we have to learn how to find fraud from a practical point of view because, again, definitions don't really help us finding the fraudsters because the fraudsters themselves, they don't know the definitions. They don't really care what is fraud, what is embezzlement, what is misappropriation. They just do it. So we have to somehow start thinking like they do think. And then we, after somehow assessing our risks, we are going to talk about a little bit how we can address those risks. So how we can prevent these things to happen, or when they happen, how can we quickly do research, how can we quickly do investigation, and do not spend millions trying to solve minor things. 2008 was the financial crisis, and the world was hit with this crisis, and lots of fraud and corruptions were uncovered. What does this tell us? That maybe the big books, the rules, the guidelines, all the legislation we have in place are not helping. Or maybe, did we really need a crisis to find out that we had fraud and corruption? Or was it maybe fraud and corruption there from before? It's a little bit like the water in the river. When the level of the water is high, everything looks clean and nice and fine. And the minute the level of the water goes a bit down, you start seeing the rats and the dirt and the pollution, but they were there from before. So we don't really need to start losing money before understanding that there is even more money that we're losing. And the same thing goes with investigation. Now we are in a crisis, we find that we have fraud and we spend millions of euros going after the 1 or 2 investigations we have to do. But it's a little bit like you have a stable. If you have a stable and 10 horses in it, and then the door is broken, and 2 horses run away, what do? Do you spend all your money, time and resources running after these 2 horses? Or would it be better that you first repair the door and make sure that the 8 horses that are still inside stay, and then you start going after the 2 horses? So, let's see. Yes, it works. So basically, to sum up everything, companies focus on corporate responsibility, corporate governance, and in my opinion, we still focus a little bit too little on what we call the dark side, which is the things that can go wrong, the frauds and the corruption and all the things that are costing us money. So I will tell you a little bit of my background in a very short while, but how many of you have experienced fraud and corruption? I'm Italian. I'm not very, very Catholic, so it's not a confession session. No one has ever. That's interesting, because by the end of the day, you will all have. So only one person has experienced. You have? You have? I'm not saying privately, it can also be at work. 1 and 2 and 3. Okay. My background is, I was born sociologist. So I have a degree in sociology of work and economics. And then I did a master in science of the organization. And I was happily working at the University of Rome as researcher and also with another institute of research, studying dysfunctions in companies. Basically, why is it, or what do you have to take into consideration when you start a new branch in another country, in another region, and what are the things that are of the organizational chart that you can reproduce in certain cultures, and what that doesn't work, and things like that. And I was actually not really thinking that fraud and corruption was one of the biggest affecting factors on why companies function in different ways in different countries, or why companies cannot function at all. So the reason why I started working with fraud and corruption is a little bit funny, because basically I was working as a guest researcher in Norway, and I was sent for a job interview to the wrong place. Basically, I was sent to this investigation company. They were working with fraud investigation, and they were looking for a secretary, and I was applying for a post as researcher somewhere else. So basically, it was a total mistake. And we started talking about things, and they explained, they were auditors, ex-policemen, and lawyers, and they were mainly running fraud and corruption investigations in big corporates. And we started talking, and I said, well, how do you put the human factor into context when you do analysis of your transactions and the money and the invoices and looking after people? And then they said, we don't, we just follow the money. And he said, well, what do you mean you just follow the money? We look at the invoice, we look for the red flags, we look for things that are not working, but do you really think about how people are thinking? Why in certain situation a person commits fraud and in another situation a person doesn't commit fraud? So basically, this is how it started, and they asked me whether I wanted to be there for a 6 months trial, and I think they thought, okay, they were Norwegians, I'm Italian, it's going to cost us very, very little in training and warming up when it comes to fraud and corruption, because they have so much fraud and corruption in Italy that she knows it already. So this is how I started, and basically from working at university, I started working as an investigator, and that was cool and shocking at the same time, because I was sent everywhere in remote places, in basements, going through papers and looking for payments and dusty things. And then I started talking to whistleblowers and going to court cases, interviews with informants, office searches at nights with the lights, and you have to hide because the guard is coming, you have to find the evidence, and all this sort of like Sherlock Holmes. I was feeling very excited. But after 3 years of doing that, I felt really, really depressed. Because basically, it was like living in Italy. It was like you just work from one investigation to another investigation to another investigation, and it's always the same story. There is one that is always able to get away with the money, one that is the victim, that is always is the one paying for it and is innocent. Someone crying, someone losing their job, someone having millions they shouldn't have, and it's really, really depressing. So that's the reason why I said, well, there must be something else we can do, like teaching all the people who really want to do something that it is possible to do something, or working with prevention, which is, do you really need to get so far away in the line, or can we prevent fraud and corruption to happen? And if we can, how we can do it? And this is a little bit of what we are planning to do today, if I manage to make it work. Do you know who that guy is?
British Prime Minister.
Hmm?
Former British Prime Minister.
Former.
Before the Second World War.
Yes. He's Chamberlain. And he's famous for coming back after a meeting with Hitler saying, I have an agreement, I have a piece of paper, there will be peace. And that piece of paper did not stop Hitler to invade Poland. And that is to say that rules, procedures, and regulations do not stop the fraudsters. There are safety nets for the people that are already honest. There are guidelines for the people who want to do the right thing. Fraudsters don't care about the rules that are in place. And again, if we don't start thinking like that, it's very difficult to be ahead of them. So this is, I want to tell you a little bit, one story about one investigation I worked on some years ago. This is a big multinational company with an operation in Southern Europe. The head of control hears that there are some rumors in one of these offices about potential conflict of interest of the management and a bit inflating expenses, a bit strange travel expenses. So he goes to the CFO and says, well, there are these rumors about management really being a bit too liberal with their expenses. What do we do? And the CFO said, well, there are rumors, but of course we have to take things seriously. So if you find some evidence about that, then great, we'll investigate it. And he said, well, I heard about some person that was unfairly dismissed because trying to report about that. So let's look into that. He looks into that and he finds out that the person was not unfairly dismissed, but that person left the company voluntarily and got quite a lot of money for doing that. So that was not really so unfair, if you want to put it this way. So they talked to the head of the unit, and the head of the unit said, well, the problem is that the unit is doing well. We are really making good money, and compared to others and other units that are doing really, really bad, do we really want to dig into this? And the CFO said, no, we'll leave it here, because if something more happens, then we'll decide what to do. And I believe that at that point in time, it was probably a good commercial decision to decide not to do anything. But then what happened is that an anonymous letter came in, and in this anonymous letter, there were description of this conflict of interest, there were names of companies, there were details about things